So this is a really controversial idea, but I think it's one that's worth exploring because I think it has merit. I think it's one of those really weird ideas, like the way that sometimes we will inoculate and vaccinate against one disease by giving someone antibodies of another disease. And what I'm talking about, as weird as this might seem, is a very deliberate form of bigotry being used to root out all other forms of bigotry within the human race. And yes, I realize this will present a problem when aliens come on the scene and we'll need to rejig, etc., and shift the goalposts further. Um, but if it's applied in the right way, maybe we won't. What I'm talking about is a very specific application of racism. And people are going, how can you say that? Racism has pitted white people against black people, against Hispanics, against Asians, etc., etc. Yes, it has. But I would say look at where the goalposts are in each case. So the idea of white supremacy, for example, is whites superior to other races, therefore other races are looked down on. You could argue ethno-nationalism within China, for example, same thing. China see themselves as superior. There's black supremacy coming out of parts of BLM, where they're even talking around and describing melanated skin or unmelanated skin as, genetic superiority and a genetic defect. Racial superiority can happen in any of these situations, and the lines can do a lot of harm. I'm not denying that. But I also see where to move the line to completely obliterate this. And this is a very unconventional concept. So I'm going to take people back to 490 BC to ancient Greece for this, because I think it's a very good application of it, and it shows what we could do if we move the goalposts to exactly the right point on racism and on racial supremacism. So, if you go to 490 BC, at that time, and up until that time, ancient Greece was not a huge nation. They weren't a huge nation until the Romans had conquered them. Then they became a province that evolved into a nation from there. Prior to that, they were a series of city-states known as poleis, being the plural for polis. Now, a polis was a city-state, it was a nation in its own right. So Athens was essentially a nation-state as separate from Corinth, as separate from Sparta, as separate from other nation-states. Now, all of these nation-states, they had a shared culture, a shared heritage, they might have a different patron god or goddess, but essentially they largely viewed themselves as the one race. However, even there was xenophobia. Because that was the entirety of their whole world. So you had the Athenians and the Spartans not getting along and having a xenophobic or racist distrust of one another. Then the Persians come along in 490, and it wasn't the Persians were going to invade Greece so much as that the Persians were going to invade, and they were more different from the Athenians and the Spartans and every other Greek or Hellenic nation at that point is a more accurate way to describe them, than the Hellenic nation-states were from each other. And so the Hellenic nation-states saw the Persians as a xenophobia-based threat that they had to unite to destroy. Now, I'm by no means suggesting we find an other, but I think there is something to be gained from that. If you think about that coming together, you have people coming together that have a shared history, they have a shared heritage, etc. And I think there's something to learn from that. And, I mean, this is a bit of a thought experiment. Maybe it's a great idea. Maybe people will turn around and say, no, you've lost your mind. Fine, we all have different ideas. But what if the goalpost for racism was Homo sapien? In other words, the notion, because racism can be taken two ways. One is you think your race is superior to other races, for example, and therefore you think other races are lesser to yours. Well, if the goalpost is human race, then suddenly you're elevating every single human being on the planet. if the racial supremacy becomes human supremacy, then aren't we celebrating every single human being? If it's human pride, as opposed to black pride, white pride, Asian pride, whatever, aren't we celebrating all our different cultures? Everything that's brought us to this part, the human spirit, our ingenuity, all of those things. So maybe racism is a parallel concept to what we want. Maybe human pride is exactly what we need, something that's positive. But imagine if we could take what racism does to us based on the superiority of our own individual ethnic group and extend the borders of that group which we're exalting to every single human on the planet. Suddenly, well, yes, someone might argue in favor of homophobia, but wait, they're human beings, and under human supremacism, they're to be valued. Same with people with a disability. Because suddenly you're focusing on the potential of that person with a disability rather than their limitations. You turn around and, for example, it's like, okay, you have. I think a great example of this, I remember hearing a while back, there was this village in Africa, no technology, no contact with the outside world, or very little. And suddenly, this farmer, I wouldn't say he invented it because they exist elsewhere outside, but in some extent he did. Out of nowhere, he creates a windmill for pumping water. No internet to teach him how to do it, no foreign guidance or anything. He just came up with it. That's human ingenuity. That's the human spirit. And in some regards, that guy in that African village is just like a Tesla or a Musk. Someone whose ingenuity, coming up with ideas, transforms the society. And, that really does say something to people who push this whole notion of racial superiority and IQ lines. It's like, well, yeah, explain that. You can't if you're turning around and saying that someone is too stupid to do something based on race. But if you're saying that human beings have the ingenuity, well, imagine what we're all capable of. Imagine what we start acknowledging that we're all capable of. Sexism, racism, homophobia, ableism, all these things go away. Because suddenly we're about elevating the human spirit. We're about valuing the human being. Now, someone might argue, what about when dolphins come along? Well, then don't you just shift the goalpost to mammals? Advanced mammals? And I do bring that up because, of course, one of the things that was never shown on the Enterprise D in Star Trek TNG, but apparently existed, was a section of the ship that was crewed by dolphins who were studying things. So, I think there are benefits in ways we look at things, and I think one of the things that we lose sight of with things when we brand them as evil and we turn around and have a superficial reaction to something is, yes, something might look like a mountain of crap, but are we missing the diamond in the crap stack? Is there something we can pull from something that may not be phrased in the best way, that may not look like it's there, but is in fact rather ingenious? And so I'd encourage people to reflect on this and say, look, is there something in the notion of racial supremacism, in ethno-nationalism, concepts in there that we can pull out to actually defeat racism, to actually defeat ethno-nationalism, to actually defeat racial supremacism? In the same way that we'll take a disease and use its antibodies to vaccinate us against another disease. Something to think about. Until next time, folks, be kind to each other. You deserve it.